So this isn't about me. It's not about Village Church. This is about all of our congregations now. The matter with the internet has gone global. Everybody sees what is happening. And if Michigan is allowed to ban an elder in his or her local church without any kind of due process before the local congregation, then that precedent will be used worldwide.
Dr. Vine in today's video is going to be talking about some of the things that's been going on with himself in the Michigan Conference, cancellation, church autonomy, leadership authority, and a number of things. And he is going to show us from the manual today. And we're not going to play the entire thing, of course. I'm going to play about 25 minutes of this. But there is so much substance here. As a matter of fact, we're coming back this Thursday on a Watchman Report to address some of the claims that are made here and also to look a little bit deeper to see what else we can learn. First of all, I thought this video was very interesting because oftentimes we don't think about some of the bylaws and policies and principles that are behind certain decision makings in the church. And oftentimes, and I'll have to admit, I have not read the entire church manual. After watching this, I plan on doing that because we just need to know what is happening behind the scene, how to respond, how to address certain things in the church, and when the rules and the principles are being violated, how we should respond. We have to understand what's happening in conferences, in leadership, and how to respond to them. And I think this conversation brings this all out. And again, you have to remember the entire debacle here. And what Dr. Vine shares is actually very interesting. This is a matter of power and authority. It's not about COVID. It's not about the church. It's not about liberty of conscience. This is about control, power.
The disputes between Village Church and the rest of the division GC in the last 3 or 4 years are not about COVID. They're not about mandates. They're not about vaccines. They're not about my preaching. They're not even about religious liberty or liberty of conscience. We are discussing the raw and illegitimate use of power by administrators. That is the essential core issue here.
And friends, I'm going to let you listen to this. I'm not going to say too much because this is a very informative video and I think it really deserves some attention. He's going to do the entire discussion for you. You're going to see what I'm trying to say. On Thursday, we're going to be talking about some things as well to show you that there is certainly a difference between what leadership are doing in comparison to what we, the people, Seventh-day Adventists who are faithful in name and in practice, what we are thinking. And he actually gives you a very good parallel in this study in the entire presentation. And I will encourage you to take a listen to the rest of this. There's going to be a link in the description below and check it out as well. All right, friends, take a listen to this.
Christ. And if we want the body of Christ to be a healthy place, then we need to have these kind of conversations. And so this morning I spoke about the connection with the United Nations. This evening I'm going to speak about essentially whether or not a conference has a right to ban an elder in their local church. So I'd like to ask you here, if you're an elder in your local church, please raise your hands. All right, okay, there's a few hands have gone up. All right, let me ask you the question, do you believe that your local administration can just ban you at a moment's notice from any participation in the life of your church? Those of you who are elders, any of you, hands up if you agree to that idea. You didn't hear me? Oh, okay. So if you believe that a local conference or the conference can ban you overnight from leading in your local church as a locally elected elder, then raise your hands. No, the answer is no. The answer is no. All right, so that's my answer as well. But I want to talk tonight about what is going on where I am, because I see there is a spirit of authoritarianism spreading across our division, and this spirit, unless it is rebuked by the members, is only going to get worse and worse. And so I've called this Buyer Beware 2, because this morning I spoke about Buyer Beware 1. So this is our journey this evening. It's not a standard triple-decker sermon. I'm going to be looking at the business meeting as the highest authority after our brief introduction. We're going to look at page 31 of the church manual. That's a very exciting heading, isn't it, for a section of a sermon. We're then going to look at the presenting issue, then the core issue, before we come to some advice to the Lake Union leadership. And then we're going to come to our conclusion. So that's our journey this evening. And while we are the audience primarily here this evening, there is a wider audience going to watch this online. I'm very aware of that fact. And this message is really for both audiences as we go through this evening. So, what do we say in introduction? So, on August the 3rd, maybe some of you saw that event, my local congregation, the Village Seventh Adventist Church, had a business meeting. It was a duly called business meeting. And we, after I gave my defense, which went online, somebody made a motion that essentially said, we affirm the rights of the conference to ban any member in our local church at any time, and humbly request the conference to change their minds. And that motion was roundly voted down after a 3-hour discussion, and then a motion was very quickly made, and that motion was, as you see on the screen, the members of our church voted, number one, they voted to reject the presumed authority of the Michigan Conference under the church manual to ban a local elder from preaching within his or her local congregation without following the due process required by the church manual. That was the first thing we voted. And the second thing we voted was that the Village Adventist Church authorized with immediate effect Dr. Vine to participate in the full life of the Village Adventist Church as an elder, including any and all preaching and public speaking participation incumbent upon the biblical teaching and preaching role of an elder. And that was the second vote. And then the third vote, the portion of the vote, was to say that the Village Church affirmed that if the Michigan Conference wished to further pursue the matter, then the conference should bring the matter before the Village Adventist Church in a special business meeting as required by the church manual. And that was our vote. And we said essentially to the conference, if you have a problem with one of our members, you come and make your case to a business session of our church, like anybody else, make your case, and the constituency will make a determination and a vote and outcome on this matter. So Elder Mitchell in Michigan, he's kind of like, a groundhog on Groundhog Day. He doesn't like to stick his head out in case somebody goes for him, and he's not going to come to Village Church and make his case. I think he's made that pretty clear to us. I don't think he wants to stand in front of the members and be screened all over the world on the internet to say, I am your president and I can ban any of you at a moment's notice. He doesn't want to do that because he knows it's not going to go down too well. So rather than come and stand before us, he sent us a letter, and there's just a screenshot of it there, on September the 5th. And he said that the Michigan Conference differed in their interpretation of the church manual, and that they had referred the matter to the General Conference's Church Manual Committee, quote, for an official ruling and guidance on the matters in question, end quote. If the GC Church Manual Committee were to uphold the Michigan Conference's interpretation of the church manual, then Elder Mitchell requested that the Village Church to rescind their vote of August the 3rd, where they reinstated me to my role as an elder and as a preaching elder. And then on November the 6th this year, we received another letter, and there it is there. Maybe you saw it on Fulcrum 7. And in this, he summarized the General Conference's response to the Michigan Conference's request for an official ruling and guidance of the matters in question. And it turned out that the General Conference was not having anything to do with this matter. And they punted the question back to the union. And so what they said was, this is in the letter from Elder Mitchell. He said that the General Conference's response clarified several key points. Number one, the Church Manual Committee functions as an editorial and advisory board for revisions and recommendations, but does not have administrative authority to interpret or issue official explanations of church manual language. Well, that's what I said in my message online called Might is Not Right. The Church Manual Committee exists to receive recommendations from divisions around the world for changes to the church manual. They kind of finesse it a bit to make sure everybody's happy with it. Then those recommendations are brought to the General Conference in full session. The Church Manual Committee has never in its history ever been asked to issue an official ruling on the interpretation of the church manual. Why? Because the church manual is to be interpreted by every local congregation in its constituency meetings, not by the General Conference. The second thing that Pastor Mitchell shared with us he said that the General Conference clarified that developing and implementing speaker guidelines is the responsibility of the local conference. That's on page 126 of the manual. So these guidelines, this is for authorized speakers, we'll come to that in a minute, direct conference administration, pastors and churches to ensure all activities align with denominational policy and mission. And then the third point he made was that the church manual, page 19, Where to Get Advice, instructs church officers and leaders, pastors and members to consult their conference regarding questions of local church operations or manual interpretation. If understanding cannot be reached, the matter should be referred to the union conference for clarification. And so he then went on to further clarify and gave us a quote from page 31 of the church manual, which says this: when differences arise in or between churches and conferences or institutions, matters that are not mutually resolved may be appealed to the next higher organization. If the matter does not get resolved at this level, the aggrieved entity may appeal to a successively higher level of organization. An organization to which an appeal is forwarded may choose not to hear the matter, in which case the decision of the highest organization involved in the dispute shall be final. Now that's a key expression. The decision of the highest organization involved in the dispute shall be final. Kind of hold that in your frontal lobe somewhere. That's a crucial phrase that we're going to hear a lot about in the coming months, I imagine. And so based on this provision, Elder Mitchell now approached the Lake Union Conference, and he said to review this matter and provide counsel regarding the appropriate application of the church manual provisions, particularly those found on pages 35 and 126 to 127. So how do we respond to this? Well, let's go back to basics, shall we? The business meeting is the highest authority in the life of the local church. And how do we prove that from our church documents? Well, you start out with this quote here from the General Conference Working Policy. So GCWPM means General Conference Working Policy Manual, Chapter B, Section 05, entitled Organizational and Operational Principles of Seventh-day Adventist Structure. I would encourage everybody here to have the latest copy of the manual and of the General Conference Constitution and Bylaws. These are important because we either have Lex is Rex or we have Rex is Lex. Lex is Rex means the law is king, or we have Rex is Lex, which means the king is law. We either have the rule of law in our church or we have the rule of administrators on personal whim. And if we are to be educated as members, we need those documents in our hands. So I'd encourage you to get your hands on copies of the church manual and of the GC Constitution and Bylaws. Now, this paragraph here says this. It says, each level of denominational organization has a defined membership, also known as a constituency. The constituency-based units are the local church, the local conference, the union of churches with conference status, union conference, and general conference. The highest level of authority within the powers granted to each level of denominational organization resides in the where? In the constituency meeting. So the first thing you notice about this is there is no mention of the divisions. There are 4 levels in the Adventist church. You have the local congregation level, that's the first level. You then have the conference, that is the Northern New England Conference. You then have the union, that might be the Atlantic Union here. And then you have the General Conference. And the unions are the constituent members of the General Conference. So the unions, they send their officers and their delegates to every General Conference session, but the divisions have no constituency of their own. A division is a subdivision of the General Conference, and that is, it's an administrative unit carved out to represent the interests of the General Conference within a certain territory, known as a division. So divisions have no constituents. They have no constituency, and they are elected by the General Conference in full session, not by any separate administrative or constituency meetings. This was important in the women's ordination debate, because when the North American Division said we're going to go ahead with women's ordination, the General Conference wrote them a legal letter and said, excuse me, you don't have a constituency to make your own decisions. Only a constituency-based entity can make a decision like that. at which point the unions in North American division said, we have constituencies, therefore we can make those decisions for ourselves. So it's kind of like playing whack-a-mole when they did that. It didn't go very well. But this paragraph here says that there are 4 levels in the church, the conference, the union, and the general conference, and the highest level of authority. What does it say? The highest level resides within the constituency meeting. Shouldn't be hard to understand, should it? No, it says resides in the constituency meeting. So what does this mean? The next is from the church manual, which says this, page 28. It says the Seventh-day Adventist form of governance is representative. Then it explains what that means. It says, which recognizes that authority rests in the what? Membership, and is expressed through duly elected representatives at each level of organization, with separate responsibility delegated to representative bodies and officers for the governing of the church at each separate level. The church manual applies this principle of representation to the operation of the local congregation. And so then you have the third quote that is pertinent to this, which says this in the church manual, page 133, the section on business meetings. It says, the local church operates within defined roles in Seventh-day Adventist church structure. Within the context of these roles, the business meeting is the constituency of the local church. So the local church, when it has a business meeting, that is the constituency of the church. Those are all the members in regular standing, not under any form of censure or discipline. And when they vote, they are the highest authority in the life of that local congregation. Just as when the executive committee of the Northern New England Conference meets on a monthly basis, however often it is, that they make the determinations, the decisions at a conference level, but they do not make determinations for the individual churches. That is left to each individual church to make its determination. So the highest authority in the life of the local congregation is the local congregation in a duly called business meeting. Note this, it is not the pastor, it is not the elders, it is not the conference officers, it is not the conference executive committee, it is not the Atlantic Union officers, nor is it the division officers, nor is it the general conference officers. The local congregation is the entity within the church manual and business, the structure of our church, which is empowered to interpret and implement the church manual at a local congregational level. Amen. Which means we should know what it says. We cannot claim responsibility to be implementing these things, and we're responsible for the implementation of the church manual at our local church level if nobody's read the document in the local church. We need to be responsible in how we use this document and the principles contained therein. There is no provision in the Bible or the Spirit of Prophecy or the church manual or the General Conference Working Policy Manual for a local conference executive committee or the officers of a local conference to unilaterally overturn a vote of a local congregation in a duly called business meeting, including the nomination and vote of any persons for church office. You all got that? Yes. There is no provision anywhere for a conference to overturn the duly elected officers of a local church. They cannot nullify it. You do not recommend elders for your church to the conference to approve or veto. All of your elders, all of your Sabbath school teachers, all of your deaconesses, all of your men's and women's ministry leaders are elected by the local church in a through a constituency session. You know, when you have your nominating committee report in church, when they say today we're going to have the second reading of the nominating committee report, you're technically in business session right then. That's a business session of the church. Whether we realize it or not, you may not think of it as a business session or it's not taking place on Sunday night, but that is a business meeting of the church when you do the first and second reading of the officers from the nominating committee report. But there is, the bottom line is this, there is no provision in any Adventist document anywhere for a local conference president to nullify, overturn, or reject or veto the duly elected decisions of a local church in business session. It's as simple as that. So let's turn to page 31 of the church manual. Having established this kind of this bedrock principle here, and this is the page, this is the paragraph that is now being grasped at to claim that the Michigan Conference doesn't like the decisions of the village church, and because we can't force them on a village church, now we're going to appeal to the union. And so this paragraph appears in page 31 of the Union, and we've already covered it a few minutes ago, but I'll just remind ourselves. It says, when differences arise in or between churches and conferences or institutions, matters that are not mutually resolved may be appealed to the next higher organization. If the matter does not get resolved at this level, the aggrieved entity may appeal to successively higher levels of organization. An organization to which an appeal is forwarded may choose not to hear the matter, in which case the decision of the highest organization involved in the dispute shall be final. So, our Michigan Conference, using this paragraph here in a legitimate way, they're appealing to the Lake Union to affirm their decision to overturn the decisions of the village and church and business session. So the village church made some votes. Michigan doesn't like those votes, and now they're, rather than saying the village church has made the decision, we have to accept that, now they're using this paragraph to say we're in dispute with the village church, and this section of the manual gives us the right to appeal to the Lake Union, and if they don't hear the matter, then the Michigan Conference, as the highest organization in the dispute between the conference and the church, then the Michigan Conference's decision is final. That's a roundabout way of effectively nullifying the principle that the local constituency is the highest authority in the life of the local church. That is what is being, that is the game that is being played today. Now this paragraph here, let's think about this for a few minutes. This paragraph on page 31 provides a mechanism for disputes between different Adventist entities to find mediation from an entity higher up in the church organization. Now such disputes can be many and varied. Let me give you some examples. There may be a dispute between two conferences over the proceeds of a land sale. Sometimes you can get disputes, as they had in Iceland over the last 15 years actually, about the profit sharing of a mining company that was owned by the Icelandic Conference, and that they appealed all the way to the Trans-European Division for arbitration in that particular dispute. Sometimes there is a territorial disagreement over the geographical boundaries between two neighboring conferences, and some churches may want to switch from one conference to another. Sometimes there are questions and disputes about the fair and equitable distribution of resources by a union across its constituent conferences. Sometimes there are questions about unamortized educational support or allowance for an employee who transitions from one conference to another conference. So there are all kinds of reasons why two conferences may get into a dispute with one another, or a conference and a union somewhere else. This is the normal process in the administrative world, and so this passage of the church manual provides a mechanism for mediation in a matter where there is a dispute between two entities. And it is right and proper that we have a provision that provides a roadmap for the resolution of disputes. But according to Elder Mitchell, however, should a conference disagree with how a local congregation is voting in a duly called business meeting, the conference can simply reverse the decisions of that congregation's business meeting. He believes that this page here means that the Michigan Conference can appeal to the union if necessary, and if the union declines to get involved, then the decision of the conference to overturn the village church's business meeting votes will be final. Why? Because the decision of the highest organization involved in the dispute shall be final. So rather than accepting that the constituents have made their decision and the administrators are to respect that decision, Elder Mitchell is using this provision here to say, we're in dispute with one of our congregations, we don't like the votes they've taken, we're going to appeal to the Lake Union as they have, and if the Lake Union declines to get involved, then our decision is final, we can override village. And if the Lake Union says, yes, Michigan Conference is right, then Michigan Conference will claim that as the justification for overriding the decisions of the constituency. So it's heads I win and tails you lose. That's what this looks like. Now, given the current administrative culture in the NAD, for administrators to protect the system at all cost against the interests and concerns of local members, it is almost guaranteed that a union will never rebuke a conference in such a situation, which means that a conference could now effectively simply override any decision of a local congregation in a duly called business meeting, secure in the knowledge that the local union will always back the conference up. If the union does get involved and make an adjudication in this case, then by implication both the conference and the union now have the authority to override any decision of a local church in business session. You think of the implications of what is being done here. So if the Lake Union gets involved and says, yes, Michigan Conference is right and we're the highest authority involved in this dispute, that means that now Michigan Conference and the Lake Union are claiming the authority to override the decisions of a local church in business session. And so once you start using this paragraph here, you effectively nullify the provision and the protection of members that the church in business session is the highest authority in the life of the local church. Elder Mitchell's understanding, if you take it to its logical conclusion, means that the Atlantic Union could now override any decision of any conference in the Atlantic Union as long as the North American Division chooses not to get involved. It also means that the GC could override any of the decisions of all unions should there be a dispute between the union and the General Conference. And I would suggest this: no executive committee in the North American Division would ever accept that outcome. The Northern New England Conference Executive Committee would never accept for the Atlantic Union to have power of veto over every decision taken by the Northern New England Conference Executive Committee, which is why this interpretation and this path that Elder Mitchell is taking is slightly absurd. We know that his understanding is not correct. Why do we know it's not correct? Because if his understanding were correct, then this clause on page 31, to which Elder Mitchell is appealing, would have meant that the GC administration could have simply overridden the three pro-women's ordination North American Division unions by imposing the three decisions taken by three different GC sessions to not allow women's ordination, as, quote, the GC was the highest organization involved in the dispute. The fact that the GC administration doesn't do this or can't do this shows the lack of validity of Elder Mitchell's interpretation. So this is a huge power grab by Michigan which will have profoundly negative consequences worldwide. If this incident is allowed to stand in Michigan, congregations worldwide will be disempowered because this is a global test case. Every decision of every local congregation in a business meeting will be subject to conference review and possible overturning. In our North American Division, only those elders and Sabbath school teachers who uphold, or at the very least never question, the godless cultural Marxist ideologies that have permeated our North American Division structure and institutions will be allowed to speak. Spiritual declension and Laodiceanism is the inevitable result, leading to eternal destruction. As we know, Michigan Conference is in the business of banning preachers these days. It's interesting to see who they ban and who they don't ban. Michigan Conference has never banned any North American Division officer, administrator, or preacher who calls for women's ordination in rebellion to three General Conference votes on the matter. Michigan Conference has never banned any preacher who calls for the normalization of LGBTQ relations and lifestyles within the church. Michigan Conference has never banned any preacher who calls for the promotion of critical race theory or cultural Marxism. Michigan Conference has never banned any church leaders who celebrate the assassination of public political figures. Michigan Conference has never banned professors who call for the allocation of tithe along racial lines, as recently happened online. The only conclusion you can come to is that if Michigan Conference is actively banning preachers they disagree with, but they don't ban preachers who preach on any of these topics, the Michigan Conference is now in favor of rejecting the General Conference votes on women's ordination because they don't muzzle those preachers. Michigan Conference, by implication, supports the normalization of the LGBTQ lifestyle because they don't ban those preachers. They support critical wave theory, third wave feminism, transgender theory, and cultural Marxism because they don't ban those preachers. Michigan Conference now supports political assassinations because they won't ban those preachers. And they encourage their African American members to redirect their tithe to the Lake Union Regional Conference and not to the Michigan Conference itself because they don't ban those speakers. This is the logical implication of what is happening. Furthermore, the application of Elder Mitchell's interpretation means that from now on all decisions will be even more centralized, from congregations to conferences, from conferences to unions, from unions to divisions, and from divisions to the GC leadership itself. The principle of one man, one vote will be that one man gets the one vote. This will enfeeble local congregations all across our division. It will muzzle elders who are faithful to truth. It will shut down Bible-faithful present truth speakers because they preach inconvenient truths. It will lead to even more cynicism, tithe appropriation to present truth ministries, and disengagement on the part of members. So